perfect political analysis on Labour and its relevance to the election. Who are Labour? The Australian Labor Party is a centre-left political party, technically founded in 1891, although in reality, obviously, a federation in 1901. More pertinently, after winning the 2022 federal election with 71 seats in the lower house, which is a perfect 51%, they formed government. Now that we are on the brink of the 2025 election, their position is one of the most important, as they will need to defend their position in Parliament from their rivals, the Liberal coalition, as well as the rising support for independent candidates, mostly the Peels, and the Greens. Before we continue, we first need to take a short look at federal elections. Now, these federal elections are held every 3 years and see Australians vote for whom will represent them in the Senate and in the lower house. The result of the latter decides who will form government. I have a whole video on that already. As in the past, there is a fair chance that we will see power fall into the hands of a different party, as on average, the average election generally ends up with someone else taking power. As such, the utilisation of other political actors is crucial, as, say, the support of the media, and thus more public support, or generous donations from a large corporation, which obviously means more money for your campaign. Although if you're stupid and like the Greens, you take money from fossil fuel investors, people aren't going to like that. So generally you want to keep the generous donations from a large corporation part under wraps. The point is, these donations in exchange for benefits can make a serious difference for, again, previous reasons. More money to your campaign, bigger campaign, easier to put out your information or misinformation if you want to play fun. Now, Labor will have to play as many of these cards as possible in order to come out on top. Why is Labor important in the first place? Like, they're just some party. It's just a couple guys. Why do they matter? Why do I care? First of all, we need to explore where Labor actually draws their power. Now, as a political party, Labor draws its power from popular support. Labor is socially progressive and economically has close ties to unions and obviously the Australian labour movement. That's why it was founded. This means that they see as much of this support come from blue-collar workers, mainly labourers. As you can, if you would please consult the graphs. I believe it's left to last, second to left. Mostly labourers, although, as we can see, most of these blue-collar workers voted for the coalition, although generally by a fairly tight margin, mainly because they tend to be more socially conservative, although, of course, it really all depends on whether or not they prefer to vote for better, quote-unquote, economic policy for them, or better social policy. So it really depends on whether that falls under them for them. Now, the youth, that is to say, those aged 18 to 25, also make up an important base of support, as Labor is a progressive party. Oh yeah, old people like coalition. Anyway, how does this compare to other actors involved in the election? Labor is not the only actor involved in the election. Here, what I'm about to do is I'm going to list 3 other actors who are relevant to the election. News Corp owns much of the news that we consume. As a news corporation, they wield the power to directly influence the result of an election by influencing public opinion towards a figure. If someone they don't like, I don't know, 20 years ago, did something kind of bad, they can pull that out of their rear pocket, and it can end campaigns. Pertinently, one of their papers, The Australian, has endorsed the Liberals over Labor in the past 5 federal elections, probably because Liberal is more pro-corporation. Whilst none of the News Corp's owned daily print publications have endorsed Labor since 2010. Yeah. Now, the opposition, which in this case would be the Liberal coalition, are the greatest threat to Labor's position as government. They have the power to dethrone Labor, as they are routinely the most and second most voted for party. Again, party duopoly. Normally, most elections end with the current guy going in, the guy going in, and then it all serves again. I mean, it doesn't. Nothing even changes. The system's cooked. Given that they are also a political party, they source their power from the same places as Labor. However, they are more popular with non-Labor blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, because they're rich, and older people, as we saw earlier. Now, the Greens are an important ally to Labor, as well as posing a minor threat, a sort of like a parasite, but they also provide some benefits. Both are left-wing parties, although Labor is more concerned about workers. The Greens lean more towards environmentalism. They both draw their support from young people, but the Greens are less focused on the Labour movement, and generally that's why they don't get as many votes from the Labourers. As you can see in those red boxes, they get like 5 votes because they're not part of the Labour movement and they're socially progressive. So when it comes to blue collar workers, they just not even relevant. Pebble to an ocean. Now, due to their environmentalism and very progressive social ideas, they are particularly popular with those aged 18 to 35, as you can see in the bottom graph, to a point where they have occasionally taken over the coalition as the second most popular among that demographic. Because again, young people, more socially liberal. That's just how that is. Liberal? Progressive. No, liberal is something completely different. Unless you're an American, then it's technically progressive. I don't know. Americans are stupid and nobody likes them. Now, what are the possible outcomes for Labor in this election? What are their possible outcomes? The good ending would see Labor win through an absolute majority. The neutral ending would see Labor form a minority government with the support of the Greens and other independents. The bad ending would see the coalition beat them out fully, forming government. Now, the objectively best ending would see Bob Katter's Australian Party winning 100% of the votes, forcefully disbanding all other parties and seizing power as Emperor Australis, hunting down and killing all crocodiles on the continent, then moving on to Southeast Asia, then Europe, then South America, before establishing a globe-trotting empire built on the total and unquestionable authority of God Emperor Bob Katter, King of the Universe, and Bishop of Rome. How would these outcomes create change and affect stability? If Labor were to form government with an absolute majority, it would most likely be with 51% of the votes, as they had done in the last 2 elections now, 2019 and 2022. Saw their respective victors, not necessarily Labor, win by exactly this margin, 51%. Winning an absolute majority would allow Labor to present more authority because they've won with an absolute majority twice, which looks pretty good on a track record. And also, it means they've won fair and square, so it's not like they've kind of usurped from not getting enough votes. They've clearly gotten enough votes to form parliament. Form government. Form parliament. Was this 1901? Political stability would improve for that same reason, because people trust them. People trust them. They're politicians. What idiot trusts a politician? Anyway, too far. Ignore that slide. Don't read that yet. If Labor were to form a minority government, as the coalition did in 2016, with 40% of the vote, but they had support from the crossbenchers, which means they form government, then they will be less able to press forward their specific goals, and they may be seen as somewhat illegitimate. But overall, political stability won't really be too affected, as people don't really care. If Labor were to lose to the coalition, with the coalition forming an absolute majority government, then they would most likely be the opposition, because, again, party duopoly, everyone votes for one of the two, which would grant them some power to pursue their goals, but ultimately they would be far less able to press their objectives. Little effect on political stability for the reasons as in the first situation, only reversed. They're just kind of, they'd be limited in pursuing what they're trying to do, which is bad for them. It's good, I mean, it's good if you're right wing or a corporation, but are these outcomes good for Labor? Now, winning an absolute majority would be very, 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 very good for Labor, as it would give them more authority to pursue their goals. Forming a minority government would mean that they require support of allied minor parties, especially the Greens, like mostly the Greens. This means that they would not be able to fully exercise their goals, and they would have to further the interest of their allies as well. They already depend on the Greens. This would make it so much worse, like to the point where the Greens just, like, they don't get too many votes, but man, they sure do act like they do. Now, losing government would be bad for Labor. Are these outcomes good for Australia? It depends who you ask, naturally, but anyway, an absolute majority would, from a stability perspective, be good for Australia, although it would mean that other viewpoints are less represented in Parliament and have less effectiveness in Parliament, which means that just basically they're just not as represented, not as presented. It's basically what's happening now. Now, a minority government would allow for more representation of left-wing viewpoints, because again, they will rely on the Greens, so anything the Greens pursue, which is just anything left-wing, means that's going to come through a lot more. But Labor would rely on allied influence, as I said before, so from the voters' perspective, they might feel kind of cheated, because why are the Greens acting like they're running the country, you know, like, what they do, I'm going to be on child sacrifice. Now, a loss would mean less capability for Labor to endorse demands. So it's bad from that perspective, but from the opposing perspective, it is good, as their views can now take precedent. And also it's kind of the same case as in if Labor got an absolute majority, because again, the other side's viewpoints aren't going to be as represented. Yeah. So, with all of this in mind, it is clear that Labor has a significant amount of influence in the upcoming election, as they are the incumbent government. They will have to balance many factors, while also rallying allies and competing against the coalition to win the lower house and cement a few more years of power. This is my bibliography. Oh, the source is the wrong colour again. That is never getting fixed. I just, hang on. Oh, I can draw! What? Oh, okay. Yeah, you got the ALP's website. You got the Wikipedia article for like general information and stuff. I just wanted to know some stuff. The essentialreport.com party approval stuff. That's pretty good. Very good. How blue collar workers voted in 2007. This is like a full blown political study too. It's crazy. And of course, then just the various articles on the 2016, 2019, and 22 elections. They're from Wikipedia, but all I needed to find, all I wanted was just the numbers of seats and percent of the House they won. So it's not, I'm not getting my political ideals from Wikipedia. No, it's actually a left. Did you know that Wikipedia has a left-wing bias? That's just something interesting I thought I'd put out there. Anyway, as you can clearly see, this presentation is top-notch political analysis, and it was fact-checked by true blue Aussie blokes. Yeah, that's the good stuff.